Okay, so we we have a few questions with regard to Lord Rama. It's like Lord Rama in the jury box. But before we take up the question, just a few things about understanding human behavior. Normally, we look at a human behavior and understand the reasons, and we try to understand or judge a human being, right? But there is another way wherein we understand the human the person, and then we try to interpret the behavior. So the question arises, is it possible to know what a human being is deep within and then understand the behavior, which is the more correct way? Isn't it? We all experience many times situations wherein we have been wrongly understood. Wrongly understood because the person who understood us didn't know what's going on inside me. So, in many of these myths and legends, especially this itihasas, Ramayana and Mahabharata, they've been written by seers who started with this, who the human being is, and then from that basis they extended into the human behavior or his actions and nature. So, Rama's story starts with this, that Rama is a divine incarnation. Now, I understand that in today's times, divine incarnation are a big cry. But let us put it like that: divine incarnation is very easy to understand. That the absolute source of creation, from time to time, intervenes in our earthly life, takes on that aspect or that stage of evolution where we all are, and then he carries it to next step further. So Rama is comes at that point of time when there is largely a humanity which is more like an animal and rakshasic and asuric. Now these terms have to be understood in their true context. Animal like means basically prone to simply largely vital pleasures and food, and these are the things which are natural to an animal kind of a humanity. But higher thought, reason, illumined mind, like many of you here so beautifully have asked the question, those things are not common or natural to animal humanity. Asuric and Rakshasic humanity likes to devour and finish. They are full of greed and ambition and lust, and they want to finish everything or control and dominate everything according to their idea and their wish, mainly for the personal enjoyment and gratification. So, this is the kind of humanity in which we see that Rama comes, and Rama has come to establish a higher standard of conduct. Now, today we have moved very far from Rama, and we have standards of conduct which surely in many of us have exceed the times of Rama. But when we look at those days when there is largely an animal and Rakshasic and Asuric humanity, Rama comes to establish at least a more humanized conduct which is for that age, suitable and possible and practicable for that age. The second aspect that we find in Rama's story is that Rama has come with a particular mission, and if we understand the mission, rest of his actions become very logical and explicable. So his mission in life was not personal enjoyment like many of us, would have, that life is about get married, be happy, have a cushy life, live by certain basic yardsticks or basic values. But basically, aim of life is like personal life to be satisfied. Rama has come to establish in place of that Raj Dharma. So for Rama, always the kingdom and the king, the ways of the king, which are meant to look after each and every member of the family which the king governs, is far more important than anything which is of a personal nature. This second aspect we see in Rama's life. So Raj Dharma, as it is called. The third aspect in Rama's life is he has come with a mission to eliminate the Asuric and Rakshasic humanity which is not willing to be humanized and go further. So these are the things which govern Rama's action. So we'll see that time and again how Rama's story unfolds and how these actions, this basic consciousness of Rama governs his actions. So let me take up some of these questions. Very interesting, and I am so glad. I had more questions than these, but I am so happy that you have asked these questions. So first, about the incidents of Kaikai. Now you see, King Dashratha belonged to a lineage where there was only one thing which was of utmost important, and it was the whole lineage of kings were known for that. King Harishchandra, then Raja Bhagirath, and all the Ikshvanku clan, if we see. So in those days, lineage was very important because there were certain common values that they all upheld. Harishchand, Raja Shivi. So the common value in the common thread of value that ran through this lineage of kings was that whatever happens, what I promise, I will stand by that. So Dashrath belonged to that lineage. The same thing we see in Rama's life, that whatever we promised, they stood by that. So it was quite natural that, when Kaikeyi went for war with him, which is something tremendous, speaks very highly of those far back times. And she saved Dashratha in the battle when he, fell unconscious at a given point of time. And naturally, pleased with her, he said, "You can ask me anything that you wish to ask." And she said, "I'll ask at the right time." She didn't scheme or plan at that point of time. And then subsequently, time unfolds, and a moment comes when Kaikeyi's ears are fed by mantra. Now, you see, in Ramayana, it's not that every character is a human archetype. This archetype word means Ramayana and Mahabharata Itihasas, and those characters you will find all through till present times. So that is the beauty of that life, that portrayal. That's why Ramayana and Mahabharata have endured. I can say this as a psychiatrist and a psychologist, that I have learned much more about human psychology through these books. So mantra represents a type of a woman or a man, it could be, it doesn't matter, who actually can poison slowly your consciousness. It comes to tell us that we should be careful of the company we keep. Well, Kaikeyi is a great lady, without a doubt, but because she is constantly fed by this woman, her consciousness gets polluted. So this is a aspect of the story where she eventually gets so much overpowered by ambition for her own son becoming a king, that she asks this boon from King Dashratha. Should King Dashratha would have had to agree to this boon? Well, he could have said, "No, it's a wrong boon. It's something wrong. I don't grant this." But as I said, for King Dashratha, his whole lineage, it was almost like his identity, that I am going to stand by my promise. It's not it is something which Sri Krishna much later revealed to us, that no, dharma is greater than promise. But Dashratha was not in the age of Sri Krishna. He was not fortunate enough to get his counsel. If Krishna was there, he would have definitely told him that don't think about your promise, think about dharma. But well, King Dashratha had its own issues. He is not a perfect ideal person. Nobody is a perfect ideal person in the age of Rama. But they are transiting from one level of perfection to another level. So King Dashratha says, "Well, I promised you," and he's in a state of dilemma. He doesn't outrightly banish Rama. He's in a state of dilemma, and Rama comes to know. So Rama goes and he agrees. He says, "No, you must uphold your promise. I would prefer that my father upholds my promise and I fulfill it, rather than I enjoy the kingdom, because then I'll always carry this burden. And what are 14 years? I'll go and come back." So that's how he thought. After all, life was not limited those days. People lived very long, and 14 years was really nothing. At the same time, for Rama, it was a wonderful opportunity to take up this whole task that he had undertaken, to go all the way and spread a nobler way of life. So Rama's mission, Rama goes as a sevak. He says wherever he goes that the Raja is King Bharat and I am only doing the fulfilling the Raj Dharma, that he would want an ideal kingdom where human beings live in a more humanized way. So he goes through Kishkinda and Dandakaranya all the way to Lanka. Now, in that journey, we see that he encounters first the people of Kishkinda, who are more like animals. Now, there are two kinds of, animal humanity. Vanara, by the way, is not animal, like, now we portray them all as monkeys, but they are early humanids. They are a kind of pre-human race which has existed. But that apart, now he encounters them, and there are two lines of, Vanara existing at that time. One which are represented by Bali. Again, we see the representation of characters. So Vali believes in might is right, and he's an extremely mighty person. Actually, Rama Why Rama? Nobody could have killed him in a straight to straight combat. It was impossible because Vali had a boon that whoever comes in front of him, he can absorb half his power. So imagine if Rama goes in front of Vali and fights a hand to hand combat, it would literally mean that Vali would be Vali plus half of Rama. So it was actually impossible to defeat him in any kind of frontal combat. So what Rama does the law of a war. In warfare has its own dharma. Even today, if in modern time, with all our modern values, if you have a terrorist entering somewhere, we had that Taj Hotel whole incidents 26/11. So no soldier, no warrior, I can assure you, from a military background, that no warrior will say that, no, come in front of me, come with a gun and I'll take a gun and I am going to see whoever wins. That can happen in a cinema. But real war is not about that. So Rama justified his action within him by saying that, well, I want the type of Sugriv to grow further because for Vali, might is right. This kind of an evolution approach would lead to titanic kings. Whereas Sugriv represents the type of animal humanity which can be humanized. So this is the representative story of the Sugriv Vali episode. Little more about it is that when Vali goes and fights the titan inside and Vali kills him, but he lets off shouts because there is a question like that. Sugriv, of course, closes and runs away because he knows that somebody who has killed Vali can easily finish the whole kingdom. That's why, so that the titan cannot escape. That was the reason why he had covered it. But Vali comes and instead of trying to understand Sugriv, trying to, in fact, even pardon him, even if he did whatever he did, he threatens him and marries his wife. That's the reason Rama gives when Vali says that, why did you kill me? Why didn't you? So that's the time when Rama explains to him that you are speaking of dharma when you initiated a whole chain of adharma. During those days, even today, to marry somebody's wife forcefully. Okay, if she loved him, it's a different matter. And his wife continued to, she got married because for her the kingdom and its safety was more important. So this is the reason why Vali had to be killed. And the second thing in that story is that Sugriv does a Maitri with Rama, which is a very symbolic story. It's a story of the animal within us joining hands with the divinized human within us. And when we do that, the animal type is uplifted. So that's the background of the story. And once Rama gives a word of promise to Sugriv, he belongs to, as I said, a lineage where promise is uppermost. It doesn't matter. He knew very well, like Shri Krishna, that whatever he is doing, killing Bali from behind, one day humanity will question it. But for him, his personal reputation was less important than standing by the friend and standing by the standards of the Raj Dharma and his work that he had come to do. This is Rama's logic, that it doesn't matter, people will judge me and think that I did something wrong, but Vali had to go because if Vali survived and Sugriv went away, then the whole kingdom of Vanara would have developed along the lines of Rakshasa and the Asura. So this is how the Vali episode unfolds. Then we see a very interesting aspect of Rama when he walks further down into Kishkinda, and that is the famous Suparnkha episode. Now here again, the poet, the master poet Valmiki speaks of two types of human conduct. One is Swatantrata. Swatantrata is where we have Sita. Sita, out of her own free will, chose to be with Rama. She was not compelled. And that speaks so highly of, not only Sita. Sita is a very powerful character. I'm not going into that aspect. Very powerful character. In fact, it is said that it is Sita who went with Ravana to try to convert him, because the story of Rama and Ravana doesn't start on the earthly plane. If you read the Ramayana, it starts when they are, Lord Vishnu's gatekeepers and they fall from grace, and Rama has to come back and convert them. So that is the mystic and occult dimension of the story. In all these stories, you will see these three dimensions: an action on the physical plane, an action on the occult planes, and an action on the spiritual plane. So this story has all these three things very beautifully interlaced with each other. So then when Sita, goes into Kishkinda, and we have the famous Suparnkha episode, we know that Lakshmana is a person prone to anger. He is quick to anger. Now, there is a line of evolution which is swatanta, which is about freedom of choices. I choose. But there is another word which is used in Hindi, which is called swachandata. I'll do as I wish. Now, they are two different things. So, Supanka represents the type of humanity. It's not about being a man or a woman, but who is swachand. So, what happens today, if I have to put in modern terms, Supanka, who's not so innocent a girl, she has threatened Sita because he wants to marry Lakshmana. Now, in today's terms, what would you call such a man or a woman? Supposing a man threatens somebody's wife because or the husband because he wants to marry this girl forcefully. Now, that person will be called a stalker if he is against doing something against the wish. Well, if Lakshmana loved her, there was no problem at all. But Lakshmana was married and Lakshmana didn't want to get married to her and he had a freedom of choice. Now, yes, what Lakshmana did is wrong and nobody can justify it. Not everything in Ramayana has to be justified. He was quick to anger. He could have probably, done something much more, but the only thing which he did was a little bit of, nose chopping, which is not good. It's not by today's standard. We don't do it. But one can understand why those standards where upholding personal dignity is very important. Now, if I can put it like this, that supposing a man is talking persistently and today a woman gets very angry and takes out a dagger and, threatens him or, saves herself, we can understand this action. Something similar took place. She was not an ordinary girl. She was a Rakshasi. She had a lot of Mayavi powers. Incidentally, if you go to Lanka, you will see still that there is a whole cult in the name of Supanka. She was not just any ordinary woman. She had powers and she had threatened to kill Sita because, she wanted to forcibly marry Lakshmana. So this is the background of why he did. Not completely a good act, definitely not a very decent act, but given the whole background, we can understand the act. So this is what happens in the Supanka episode. The rest is history. She goes and tells Ravana, and Ravana gets angry. Brother gets angry. Understandable, whatever she has spoken. But when the brother gets angry, a man of the caliber of Ravana, supposing somebody has hurt my sister, what would I do? I would go, if I am a strong person, I would go and challenge him in a frontal combat. Come. You have dared to touch my sister. Come, if you have the guts, fight with me. This is a warrior clan. But what does Ravana do? He deceives and takes away Sita by force. This is very ignoble. Sita was no way involved. If he had to punish somebody by the yardsticks of justice, he should have come and challenged Lakshmana. Even told Rama, you stay away. Let me just have a mortal combat. So he did something which was full of deceit, which was the way of Ravana. If you see the life of Ravana, in Ravana's life, ambition, deceit, lustfulness, taking women by force, if you see the whole story, it is very well documented. I mean, he was a being like that. Yes, he was a bhakta also. He was a very talented person. He was a very, educated, means literate person. But Ravana's story comes to prove us that we may have many talents. We may have, great capacities in art, music. We may be, we may have a degree from Harvard University or wherever. Yet, in our consciousness, if we are Asurik and Rakshasi, even if we are a bhakta, we bring that there. So Ravana brought a lot of egoism even in bhakti. And the result is a fall. So Ravana is a prototype of humanity, an archetype of humanity, who is extremely talented, capable, even Vidwan. He had read the Vedas and yet he did not change himself within. And the result was the downfall, progressive downfall, leading to, the inevitable end. So as I said, each of these stories are an archetype. If you look at them like that, it's a beautiful, message to all of us. As long as humanity remains, Ramayana story will remain relevant because, you see through the different human characters and their different shades. Now he comes and kidnaps Sita. Somebody asked the question, why did she cross the Lakshman Rekha? Just for information's sake, the incidence of Lakshman Rekha is neither in Valmiki Ramayana nor in Ramcharitmanas. Okay, so it is, I don't know where the incidence has come from, but nevertheless, Sita was a very kind and compassionate lady, and according to mystic literature, she deliberately went with Ravana to try and convert him. But Ravana did not. So this is the aspect of the Sita story. And if some of us may not be aware, because this is relevant to the Agni Pariksha, there is a conversation documented in Valmiki Ramayana between Rama and Sita before the whole thing starts. So Rama in his divine, now they are speaking as divine beings. Like, when let's say a prime minister speaks to the nation, there is one thing. But when he speaks to his council of ministers, it's something very intimate that he is discussing. When he speaks to his wife, he's not married. But let's say to an intimate friend, there he will disclose his deepest secrets. So there is a conversation documented between Sita and Rama. And why it is important to understand all this is that, we often read snippets of a story, and it's good to know the whole story in great detail. So Rama says the time has come when we have to fulfill the work for which we have come. What is that work? One is to take Ravana back, because originally he is there, one of the person who kept guards on the gates of Lord Vishnu and tried to convert him. And the second is the mission of taking away the Asuric and Rakshasic element, refining the animal, and thereby raising humanity to one notch higher. So, but Sita being the divine mother, no Ravana can come near. So Sita says, okay, then I will go into Agni and bring out my shadow aspect. So it is, shadow aspect means Sita holds back her divinity within. You see this, you'll see very often in the story of Mother and Shri Aurobindo also, and he speaks about how the avatar is somebody who puts on a human appearance. So Sita now, because the whole play has to begin, she becomes a very ordinary humanity, because she has to show how an ordinary woman can fight against a tyrant king. So that's the message that Sita gives, and how independent she can be. If you look at Ramayana only from the story of Sita, it is amazing story. Somebody has said that, Urmila was the greatest. No doubt Urmila is great. No doubt about it. But Sita is unparalleled. And I'll show you how Ramayana itself brings out that. So Sita holds back her divinity and puts on just a little appearance of an ordinary woman. Otherwise, Ravana could not have come near or touched her. And the first sign of that is when she tells Rama that, there is a golden mrig and I want it for myself. And Ravana tells her that, be careful of things which are unusual, because there is nothing like a golden, deer. And yet she insists, which is very unusual of Sita. And Rama goes, and then, subsequently Lakshmana is sent. We all know that story, not going into the detail because of the time. But yes, that story is there to show two things. One is that how Sita had managed to veil the divinity and only her human self was in the front. Second is, this story has become a symbol, of running after the golden deer. It's called as, Mrigamarichika. So that story itself has become so beautiful that today it is a phrase in Hindi that, don't run after Mrigamarichika. Something which looks golden, dear, it's a very unusual thing. Don't run after such thing. But that is one aspect of the story from where the whole journey begins of Rama's mission. Why did Sita cross the Lakshman Rekha? Well, she was compassionate, she was kind, and Ravana had come in a deceitful way, and then he abducts, and the rest is history. But what is beautiful in that journey of Rama is the seeds of modern socialism. Not modern socialism, but true socialism. Now, socialism is that all people are equal. But Rama sets a very high standard when he goes through that. He becomes friends with Vanara. He becomes friends with Vulture when, Jatayu is killed. He becomes friends even with the Rakshasa and the Asura. Vibhishana is part and parcel of his, Rama's entourage. So eventually Rama creates a world empire, within the Indian range, Aryavart, wherein all these people had their place, had their own kingdoms. Rama never usurped anybody's kingdom. That is something very amazing. Rama goes into Kiskinda, he kills Vali, but Rama doesn't say that I will be the king. So he set very high standards of nationalistic thought. That, I enter to defend. In modern times, you can speak about the formation of Bangladesh. India went into Bangladesh, liberated the Bangladeshis, came back. India didn't say that now, you are a vassal state, which we know that certain countries do. So Rama set this standard that even when you go in to help, don't usurp. So he thrones Sugriv and subsequently, Vali's son Angad, who himself becomes, Rama's favorite. He goes to Lanka. Ravana is overthrown, but Rama doesn't stay even for a day saying that, well, I am going to be the king now because I am the one who has conquered. He lets the throne be on Vibhishna, who is a local, who is a native person. If you look at from this point of view, you'll see that what a high standard of Raj Dharma, of kingship that Rama established, both as a socialist and as a democrat. And because he set the highest standards of democracy, we speak about democracy as something modern. Look at Rama's democracy. There is a law of the land during that time. And the law states that if a woman has stayed with another man, see, this is the loophole of the law. If a woman has stayed with another man for whatever period of time, she has to prove her chastity. Now, this is something which is not right. Today we know that. Definitely we know that. But when in those days, when there is an animal humanity, when there is a Rakshasic humanity, men or women, this was the law. It was an unfortunate law, and Rama eventually changes it. But it is still the law when the whole incident happens of the Dhobi. See, this is how it comes. Now, Sita's Agni Pariksha is basically a mystic symbol. There is no doubt that anybody walking through fire, having a human body, will be burned to ashes. So surely that incident which has been, first of all, Sita herself says that, I want to walk through the fire. Incidentally, in the Valmiki Ramayana, it is not Rama asking Sita to go through that. Nobody asks Sita. Sita says, I must come. And that's a very, very beautiful mystic symbol in two ways. One is, Sita represents the divine power which has diminished herself to ordinary human nature. You know that story where she goes into fire and her shadow self is in front. So we also have a divine nature, but right now that is veiled, and the human nature as we have today is usurped by the Asura. Now see the mystic symbol of the story, that it is usurped by Ravana. Now when this nature, even when you kill the demon within, the ego within, nature is still stamped by the contact of the Asura, and it must go through a process of purification. So Sita's story of Agni Pariksha, well, we are very rational beings, I'm sure, and I don't believe, and none of us would believe, that a woman or a man, even a god, would walk through fire and come back unscathed. Certainly not. That story is very clearly a mystic symbol. So as I said in this story, you have all these three things interlaced. There is a human element of the story, dimension of the story. There is an occult dimension of the story. There is a mystic dimension of the story. There is a spiritual and even a divine dimension of the story. So this is the Agni Pariksha. When they go to the kingdom, this washerman, now look at the paradox, washerman washes clothes. Story is amazing. Ramayana is... something most wonderful story. So what happens to this washerman? Washerman washes the clothes, but his consciousness is still polluted. When Sita comes, he raises this word. He raises this word that why there is a different set of laws. He doesn't say that Sita should be tested or anything. He said why there is a different set of laws for the king and for the commoner. Now this was where Rama had erred. He had slipped completely, that there are laws, archaic laws, which need to be changed. Today, that's why we see that, one of the things that the Prime Minister, the moment he took over, he wanted to change the laws. So, there are archaic laws. Rama should have paid attention. He didn't pay attention. Actually, he went into the forest. The only person that time who was governing was Bharat. And Bharat also was absent. So Shatrughan was, governing the kingdom. And an incident had taken place in the kingdom wherein a woman had gone away with somebody, and when she came back, she had to be banished. Now this man quotes it. Now this incident, when it happened, was the decision was taken by Shatrughan. Neither Bharat nor Rama. They were not there to consult. Rama comes back, and within a short period of time, this question is raised. Maybe he would have changed the law. Maybe he wouldn't have, he may have overlooked it. But when a commoner raises a question that why there are two yardsticks, one for the king and one for the commoner, Rama, for whom Rajdharma is uppermost, Rama takes the call and says, okay, I will uphold the law of the land, and then I will show that even while I uphold the land, yet I will set a new standard of morality. So what was that new standard Rama set? Sita is banished, one of the most tragic episodes, but there are two fallouts of this episode. So whenever we look at an episode or an incident, we should see the fallouts. Two fallouts of that episode. One fallout is that throughout his rest of his life, Rama never remarries. Rama is known for this, that Rama loved once and that was the last of Rama's love. During that time, Kshatriyas could remarry. They were asked to remarry because they needed a progeny. The king Dashratha, he had three wives. It was very common. Even King Janak, though he is a Raj Rishi, it was very common because they wanted to have the lineage. As the more the merrier. I mean, today we live in a different world and a better world in many ways. But in the age of Rama, it was needed that he remarries, so to have a progeny. And though he was advised, Rama refuses it. Because Rama says something what, I remember Sri Aurobindo speaking of Mrilani Devi, where I have loved once, I cease not from loving. When you look at Ramayana from the point of view of, love, story of love, he's upholding the Raj Dharma of sending Sita away. But at the same time, Rama's heart is torn. If you read the story, Rama actually goes into what today we'll say a state of depression. That during that time, Rishi Vasisht comes and counsels him and explains to him the nature of creation, all these things. But Rama finds it very difficult. So what Rama does is, as a symbol of Sita still being with him, he keeps her image by his side. So Rama didn't cease loving Sita. Even though he upheld the Raj Dharma, he didn't cease loving Sita. Now in this story, we have a mystic symbol again. Sita and Rama, their coming together is the coming together of the divine and material nature. You see, in traditional yoga, we say that, nature cannot be changed and the soul can be purified and united with the divine. So Rama represents the divine soul and Sita represents earth nature. See the mystic symbol, she is born from the earth. Do we really believe that somebody really comes from the earth in a kumbhak? It is clearly a mystic story. It's not something which is real in this sense that actually she was born like a virgin birth. Virgin birth story is also symbolic. So Sita emerges from the Bhumi. She is a Bhuminja. She is earth nature. And Rama is the divine soul. Their coming together can establish a ideal kingdom on earth which is called as Rama Rajya. But they cannot come together because always there is a dhobi with a doubt in his mind that it's impossible for nature to be purified. It cannot be purified enough that it can mate with the divine soul and a divine progeny be born. So this story of parting of Rama and Sita, which is an extremely tragic story, yet it leaves a stamp of a possibility. They could, if human beings could efface doubt from their head, and if earth is ready, mankind is ready, there could be a heaven, kingdom of heaven upon earth, a Rama Rajya, which means that there will be a perfect union. See, people ask about an ideal kingdom. How it will come? Ideal world, unless nature is purified and transformed by the divine touch. That is where we understand that the parting of Rama and Sita, which took place in far back ancient times, which should have been the beginning of a new creation, takes place after nearly 17,000, 18,000 or whatever years much later down the line with the coming together of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And we see something similar happening now. The moment they come together in 1915, there is the First World War. And she has to go back. Something very similar, and she has to go back with her husband who represented himself being no less than the king of Lanka. So you see the same forces at work, but eventually she comes back in 1920 and the two are together and a new divine family starts, of which all of you and all of us are fortunate inheritors. So Rama's story is a deeply symbolic mystic story as well as a physical story. But again, as I said, the fallout of Sita's banishment, it creates something in Ramayana without which Ramayana would have been incomplete. And what is that? Ramayana is all about Rama. Everybody sings the glory of Rama. Where is Sita in it? Sita is kidnapped. Sita is, brought back. It is all Rama who is a chivalrous warrior. The man who, for the sake of his wife, challenges the Rakshasa and the Asura. Look at the chivalry. Just with an army of, he could have called people from Ayodhya, his kingdom, and from Janakpuri, Sita's kingdom. Why he didn't call? Because he was under the orders of banishment. He had accepted it. So Rama would uphold that dharma. I can't use the kingdom's resources. So he goes in a daredevil act that I'll do or die, but this is not acceptable to me, that any person kidnaps anybody, and if Ravana can do this to Sita, he must be doing it to many, many women. And yes, indeed he was doing, and he took on the challenge of the Asura. So there we see Rama's chivalry. And then subsequently, however, when we see that, Rama and Sita part, then we see that Sita's fullest strength comes. There are three occasions when we see Sita's, it becomes Sitayana, not Ramayana. The first is when Rama walks into the forest. Sita could have stayed back and said, well, I don't need to walk. After all, the order is not for me. Lakshman didn't need to walk, but still it's okay. He was literally like the shadow of Rama. And he is himself a, prince with valor. And it's okay, he will be with him so that, they can guard each other. But Sita had no reason to go. But out of her love, that no, everything is fine. But who will take care of my husband? And therefore she follows her own highest ideal of that time and goes with Rama. I am sure there are many, many, even today, who will do that. Who will prefer love over all the, comforts of a material life. So Sita's first ideal, not just womanhood, but the power of womanhood, Shakti, comes when she walks with Rama. The second is when Sita is with the king of Lanka, despite fear and lures. Ravana lures her that, if you come, you will have much more, much greater things. Forget Rama. What is he? He is a Banvasi. He can't save you in any case. So be my wife. And you see, if you come, you will be the one whom I will treat as the ultimate. Mandotri will be in the background. But Sita does not accept it. Then Ravana threatens. Sita does not accept it. Now, when to this degree, we see that, Rama and Sita story, that time Sita's utmost courage, strength, valor, the feminine power comes. And the third is when Sita is banished into the forest. She does not file a court case if there was a possibility or, have bitterness and grudge against Rama. She continues to bring up the two children in a most beautiful way. Sita sets the highest standard for women autonomy. Even if my husband is a god, I don't depend on him. And the way she brings up the two children is amazing. They are so powerful, so beautiful beings. They don't have a word of grudge against Rama. This is how she brings up. What a woman. I would say hats off and Dandavad Pranam. So Sita's banishment, through that, Valmiki brings out the ideal feminine within, earth nature. Now there is one character missing in all this. The very important character on whom also there are some questions. That is Hanuman. So who is Hanuman? Why doesn't he simply, we know Hanuman is an avatar of Shiva. Again we see in Hanuman's story, there is the mystic element, the occult element, and Hanuman can do things which, ordinary human being cannot. Obviously there are powers and siddhis Hanuman has, but Hanuman is a bhakta of Rama. Hanuman is Rama himself in another body. He has come to set the highest standard of bhakti. He has come to show to an animal humanity that you may not have hope. All of us have an animal within us. But through bhakti, through love and surrender, through service, our animal nature can be changed in such a way that we can become a demigod. So Hanuman's story, to start with, shows to us whatever our nature may be, even if we are through and through animal, still through bhakti, surrender, love and service to the divine, our nature can be transformed and we can become demigod. This first thing that Hanuman shows. Second, the surrender. Yes, this question, why didn't Hanuman bring back Sita? He was capable of doing it. But Hanuman doesn't do it. Why? Because he has not been given orders. Rama didn't tell him to bring Sita back. And now Hanuman's surrender helped in this way. Hanuman could have taken Sita. Hanuman doesn't do that. Why? Because Rama had not asked him to bring. What would have happened if Hanuman brought Sita? Sita would have escaped. But what would have happened to the Asura and the Rakshasa kingdom? One of the purpose of Rama was to ensure, first to challenge, ask them to surrender and thereby accept the humanization, or not, then face and whoever wins. So it was something like that. So when Rama, because Sita refused to come, this chance was given to Ravana and the entire family to surrender and change. If not, then face the battle and the change happens. If Sita would have come back, yes, Rama and Sita would have lived happily hereafter. But it was not a modern Hindi movie. Ravana's Rama mission would have remained incomplete. And Hanuman intuitively knew this. So he doesn't do that. And third, about Hanuman's tale and the demolition of Lanka, I am sure we all know that this is a very again, like, the Swarnamrig, it has become a phrase to reveal a deeper truth. So it is obviously to imagine that Hanuman had a tail burning and he was burning all the, golden towers, if at all gold can be burned that way, is subtly, even if you stretch human imagination, it will go to a fantastic proportion. But that story is a mystic symbol, and till date, that story is remembered as a mystic symbol. The symbol is that, however high and mighty you may be, whether you are a Ravana with a golden city at your disposal, you may have the kingdom of Atlantis, you may be King Priam of Troy, but yet, if you are living by adharma, even the golden city of Lanka will be decimated, will be burned to ashes. So this is very clearly this story, and number of stories of Sursa expanding and Hanuman entering and coming out. Many of the stories in Ramayana, also in Mahabharata, but less so. In Ramayana we see, because Ramayana belongs to a much earlier age, it's Treta Yuga story. So we see there very clear mystic and occult symbols. And these mystic and occult symbols are intermixed with the story in such a beautiful way that it runs like a common narrative. That's the beauty. That's something great about the artist. Imagine doing a painting where you don't know where the real painting is, where there is an optical effect. So you see, even modern mind, extremely rational, when we read through the story, it never strikes us that here is a symbol. How could Hanuman be burning everything? It is so beautifully interposed. We see the same thing in the stories of Bhagavad of Sri Krishna. Absolutely fabulous work. And then when we look at this story even from a work of art, that how he has blended deep spiritual truths, many others, which, I am not right now taking up. I'll quickly see if there are some more questions left, or, you can ask questions if you wish to. I'll be very happy. We see that the whole story is, at once, there is a physical being called Rama, no doubt, a king of Ayodhya, and he's mentioned in several scriptures. There is a whole lineage which is mentioned, and who set the highest standard for humanity. Now, why is Rama relevant to us, we may ask? Rama is relevant to us. I mean, humanity has moved forward, no doubt about it. We don't, banish a lady because, she has been outside. We give her the freedom of choice. So that's today's times. But during Rama's time, this happened, and today it shouldn't happen because, humanity has moved forward. But why is, we don't, for example, go with a dagger in hand and sort out our personal issue. We file a court case. Whether it's good or bad is a different issue. But that's how modern humanity, which is more rational humanity, will proceed like that, which is good. But then why is Rama still relevant? This is the question we should ask. Where are the monkeys? Where are the asuras? Where is somebody, kidnapping away on a Pushpak Viman? Well, modern Viman, whatever we say. The story is relevant, one, because Rama is the first person within this geographical boundary which today we call as India. But that time it was called as Jambudweep. And in that kingdom, Rama is the first king who establishes in place of Jambudweep Aryavarta, meaning thereby the land of those who live by the highest standards of their time. Aryan, as we all know, Sri Aurobindo has spoken at length about it. Many other persons, Swami Vivekananda and many others, this Aryan Dravidian theory is an utter, humbug thing created to create a divide. So who is the Aryan? He is a psychological type of humanity who would give his life than his promise, who would give his personal comfort than the kingdom and the truth and the ideals he upholds, who would embrace all within his fold and release them into freedom. Rama does that. Who would not create distinctions, even that he is a, fallen being, he is an accursed being. No. Even the most accursed, when he comes, the Aryan embraces. Even when he conquers, he does not crush those whom he conquers. Look at the difference between Rama, a person 18,000 years back, and look at England 100 years back, and compare the civilized nation of today with a so-called uncivilized humanity 20,000 years back. Rama conquers Lanka, but he doesn't, say that I am the king. He withdraws from Lanka. Rama conquers Kishkindha, but he doesn't say I am the king of Kishkindha. Compare it with the British coming into India, conquering, changing, converting, hanging by the neck, and we can see where is that standard of civilization. So Rama had come to set, he's the first person who embodies the soul of the Aryan type. Of course, Aryan type is not a fixed type. He evolves. From Rama, he goes on to Krishna, he goes on to Buddha, and he, now Sri Aurobindo has set an even greater standard. So this is how, but he's the first person who established within the entire kingdom, because Rama doesn't stay in Ayodhya alone. Before that, we have Parshuram and others. But Rama is the first person who, as a human being, right down from all the way from Ayodhya to Lanka, establishes a new idea and an ideal of what human beings should be and what a kingdom should be. Is Rama infallible? No, Rama is fallible. No doubt about it. Rama represented the ideal human mind, the ideal ethical values, and ethical values are always ultimately subject to some error. He had not come to spiritualize or divinize humanity as Sri Krishna and Sri Aurobindo came to do. So he showed the fallibility. There is the fallibility. By any moral or ethical standard, one, if any of us can name, where when you do an act, it will not have adverse repercussions on others. Invariably. As somebody has very rightly, put that, rightly little, I like the innocent way of putting it. What's wrong with Supanka? After all, she, a lady who needed love. Yes, she's a lady who needed love probably. No doubt about it. I agree. But look at it. Now, if Lakshmana went with Supanka to satisfy her need for love, what would have happened to Urmila? And if Lakshmana did not listen to her, Supanka is devastated. There is no moral standard in this world which can be universal, which can make everybody happy. No. And sometimes the choice is between a lesser evil and a greater evil. Sometimes the choice is between keeping your personal hands clean and becoming a good guy in the, annals of history, vis-a-vis taking on frontally the evil, smudging your hands and yet freeing the world, making it a better place. So this is what was the choice for Rama. He had come to make this world cleansed of the Asura and the Rakshasa and to humanize the animal kind. This was his mission. He accomplished it very well. As regard his personal life, what should be an ideal man-woman relationship, he left it much later. I would say probably for Sri Aurobindo to come and fulfill it. Otherwise, that was not his mission, not his work. And Sita was fully with him. She knew that why Rama is doing whatever he is doing. That is the kind of trust, the sacrifice, the story of Tyaga, Tapasya and sacrifice. This what in India were the highest values. The highest values in India were not like, I want to do it and I do it, I am happy, so and so is happy and I live my life happily hereafter. The highest values that have been embodied in the Indian, not constitution but Indian character, to whom we belong happily and fortunately, are Tyaga, sacrifice. Rama sacrifices his kingdom. Rama also sacrifices his wife. It's not that he was happy doing it. Why? Because he wants to uphold the highest standards. He never lived happily thereafter. If you read the story, he's a miserable human being. He takes the misery upon himself, but gives protection, gives sanrakshan to the kingdom. There is a pathos in that story, but a divine pathos. How a divine being sacrifices, and it's not only Rama. In Rama's case, we see it in an extreme way. What about Krishna's life? What about the life of Buddha? Did Buddha do a right thing or a wrong thing by leaving his wife? Is the upward side of the story. Well, if you look at personal life, he did a wrong thing. His wife would have been happy, his kingdom would have been happy had he continued with his family life. But Buddha would not have been Buddha, and countless number of human beings would not have been inspired if Buddha would not have left Yashodhara and gone away. Look at Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo leaving behind Mrinalini Devi and walking because he is followed by a divine call. Imagine. Sri Aurobindo could have been happy with his wife and would have earned a name for himself in the freedom struggle, been regarded as a great leader and lived happily hereafter, having children and all the rest. But again we see him upholding the highest Aryan ideals, Tyaga, Tapasya. And thanks for that. Though there was one Milani Devi who must have suffered, I'm sure, but there are countless, countless others like us who feel redeemed by that touch. So, this is a choice sometimes we have in morality, where there is a personal issue of a life and there is a larger collective issue. The same thing we see in the Gita. Arjuna refuses to fight. They are my own people, my own kula. But there is a larger standard, and that has to be upheld. So, smaller for the sacrifice for the greater. And that is what is the whole idea of dharma. Dharma for Rama is most important. For Krishna, Sri Aurobindo, we see. Now, what really is this dharma? How can the divine manifest in this earth? How can you set a highest standard of being and living given the context of time? Of course, this standard evolves as we evolve. Dharma has this evolutionary dimension in Indian thought. It's not a fixed rule of do's and don'ts. Things that Rama did, we need not do today. Certainly, we need not, and we should not. But we must yet salute for that age, for him who's established the soul of Dharma within Aryavarth. Before that, if you see, we have Parshuram and all the lineage of avatars. We don't see that kind of. Other stories are all on the subtle plane. The only story which probably takes place on earth is Parshuram. Before that, Vamana, they are all stories on the subtle plane. But in matter life, in material life, in a embodied geographical space, the first person whom we see establishing the soul of India, in the heart of India, that is Rama. So our salutations to him. So this is, I think I've covered some of the questions. If anything is left, by and large, just to... I think more or less I haven't really seen, but Lanka on fire, that is covered up. Ravana is king of Daman and he was way more talented. I have already covered it. That, I think more or less they are covered, right? Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. Can you please expand just a little on Sita being asked to leave the kingdom? That aspect by Rama, and there's a question on that on page 3.
Yes.
Can you just speak a little more on that aspect on the Agni Pariksha and the subsequent departure of Sita? That's a crucial part to get.
Yes. So Agni Pariksha, I have already explained that this is when a great poet like Valmiki writes epic of the nature which is endured, we must understand that Agni Pariksha is very, very clearly a symbol. It's not a real event. I can tell you that it's an impossibility for any woman, however chaste she may be, because human body will follow the laws of the body. It's an untransformed body. So Agni Pariksha, we have to look at it purely as a purification of material nature, going through a process of purification, which is a tapasya, and thereby becoming fit to meet the divine within and become one. This Agni Pariksha, there is no other way we can look at Agni Pariksha using our rational mind. But symbolically, we can understand it. Sita's banishment is at once physical and symbolic. First part is that yes, Sita's banishment, I have told about the story of Shatrughan taking a similar decision earlier, and Rama, before he could change the law, he is confronted by an archaic law. Now, Rama could have changed the law. It was within his thing to change the law. But Rama didn't choose to change the law because it would have been very odd that the king conveniently changes the law. So he went by the law, which was to banish a lady who has been with somebody for a month. I mean, she cannot again be with the same husband. Now, it is no doubt a law which, if at all there is such a law, it must be changed. And I'm sure it has changed now. As I said, everything in Rama's story is not something we have to practice today in modern times. Certainly, it is the most tragic incidents. But as I said, when a great poet is weaving out an epic, you have to see what is the fallout of that story. It is this story which suddenly changes the story of Rama from the story of Rama to the story of Sita. The beauty of Sita, the strength of Sita, which would not have come out. So we have to understand how the narrative comes. There are people who believe that there is nothing like this happened. But I don't believe. I believe that something like this did happen. That's why, Uttarakhand, many people try to avoid it. Yes, Rama did that. And it's not a right thing to do. But for Rama, as I said, the choice was between personal morality, personal happiness, and the good of the kingdom. If Rama would not have banished Sita, Rama would have been happily, Sita would have been happy hereafter, both of them. But there would have been this blot that, well, when it came to himself, the king upheld his personal happiness over the law of the land. And Rama chose to do it. Why he had to do it incognito? He couldn't have confronted and faced the whole event. So all the brothers, Lakshman, when you read that incident is very hard, the tragic pathos. But the beauty of that incident, as I said, is it brings out the best of Sita. And banished from kingdom is a way of saying she was well within the kingdom, but all the ashramas were above the kingdom. She goes into Rishi Valmiki's ashram. So ashrams were not regarded as something subject to the king. In fact, they were the ones who were supposed to look after the kingdom. So when it is said banished out of the kingdom, well, it was Rama's kingdom. Valmiki's ashram is there. But because she is in an ashram, ashramas were supposed to be exempt from the rule of the land or, the king, because the rishis were there who were far more wiser. And they were the ones who were the custodians of even the king's ethical standards. So when she goes to Valmiki's ashram, it means that she is beyond the pale of social norms and, the king's laws and other things. She is in that place where nobody can touch her, nobody can, come and threaten her or ask her any questions. That was the reason why she's there. So it's not really banished from kingdom in that sense. And as I said, yes, that's an event. Definitely Rama carries with him in his own heart as something to be changed for a future time. Rama himself suffers, Sita suffers, and yet Rama had to do it. As I said, comparing with the analogy of Buddha, that there are moments when you have to choose between your personal happiness and setting the highest standard of conduct for everybody. And Rama does that. Not fully justifiable, no doubt about it. And yet there is within it a sense of breadth of the divine afflatus. If Rama would have been happy, if Rama would have done it under the spell of personal suspicion, if Rama would have banished her and said, see how great a king I am, if Rama would have got remarried, that would have been the real blot on Rama's character. Rama doesn't do that. He shows that even after the banishment of Sita, he lives alone, loving Sita with all his heart. And of course, that Dharti ka Fatna and Sita's going inside is very clearly again symbolic. Earth nature, from where she has emerged, goes back to earth nature. Some stamp it carries that there is a possibility of a divine union of nature and the soul. You see, this to understand this union of nature and the soul, one has to go into the mystic lore. Mystic lore distinguishes between soul, which is the divine element within us, and the prakriti or the nature, material nature, which is the creation of the evolutionary process. And this evolutionary process that takes place in matter, through which new possibilities, new faculties, new capacities develop. So Sita represents that. She embodies the earth nature. And that's why she is a Bhumija, born from the earth nature. And it is in the union of material nature, completely purified, completely changed, divinized, and the beautiful, pure divine element within us, that there lies the secret of transformation and the beginning of a kingdom of heaven upon earth. This is what the story mystically. So we can look at the entire Ramayana story from a purely mystic and symbolic level. Eventually, that is what will endure. I'll give an example. The Mahabharata takes place. We can talk about whether it was good of Krishna to engage in such a massive massacre, to ask Arjuna to kill his own people or not. We can debate that, and we can even say there are people who say Krishna did a wrong thing. He killed, he allowed Dronacharya to be killed in a certain way. Bhishma was killed in a certain way. But it was a similar dilemma for Krishna. Does he smudge his own hands or keep his own hands clean and be regarded as, the epitome of non-violence? Or he lets his hands be smudged, but opens the way for human evolution. He knew that with Duryodhana and, all these people at the helm of affairs, there is no way that humanity can progress easily toward the future. They had to go. He gives them a choice. Rama also gives the choice to the king of Lanka. He gives them a choice. Of course he gave a choice. This idea that he suddenly didn't counsel him and talk to him is not true. He sends at least two emissaries. The first is Hanuman. Hanuman tells him that don't do this. And he does it. Then he sends a proper emissary, Angad. And he tries to even kill Angad. So it's not true that Rama didn't try to talk to, Ravana and tell him that, stop your ways. He did. And even otherwise, as was the custom in those days, through emissaries, and even when Ravana comes, that is the time when Rama spares him. He could have easily killed him. But he doesn't do that because he wants to stay by the highest standards. So in Rama's life and in Krishna's life, we see something similar. Well, Mahabharata, whether it was there or not, we can debate who was right, who was wrong. But we see that Mahabharata cleared the path for mankind to move toward the future. Because the kingdom of Yudhishthira, who would rule with dharma, Yudhishthira again we see, a man living by ethic, he has done wrongs, no doubt about it. Ethics is not the highest rule of life. But yet, given the choice between Duryodhana and Yudhishthira, Yudhishthira is a much better person. So that's how we have to look at, always in life we have these relative choices. And the second thing we see, the fallout of Mahabharata, is the Gita is in our hands. Mahabharata may or may not have been true, but the Gita is there. So the whole Ramayana story can be seen in this way. Not the actual details, who really spoke and who really said this dialogue. Well, we don't know. There is a beautiful weaving of the narrative by the poet. But what is he trying to convey? See, when we look at an epic of a grand scale, what is the poet trying to convey? Few take-home points. That eventually, Satyamev Jayate, the dharma always wins. Second, that when there is a choice between individual and collective, public morality and a collective good, choose the collective good. Even if, individually it hurts you, it pains you. Third, be chivalrous and courageous among men. Do not shrink from a battle of life, even if the enemy is a strong opponent like Ravana. Stand by dharma. You rise or fall, but stand by dharma. Fourth, the woman is not a weak character. She is strong like Sita. Stronger by her fate, stronger by adversity. Every adversity in Sita's life makes her strong. If Sita would have stayed back in the kingdom of, Dashratha, she would have been just another woman. So this is the fourth aspect of the story. Fifth, however mighty you may be, even if, like a Ravana, even if you may be talented, capable, yet if you live by adharma, one day you will have your downfall. If this story looks too idealistic, in our own 100 years back, less than that, we have seen how Hitler, Mussolini and Stalin fell. Much worse than Ravana, much more capable of much greater devastation, yet they fell. So had they read Ramayana and got the message, Hitler would have probably thought twice before engaging in what he did. He had obviously not read. He read it from the wrong side. He wanted to get occult powers from India. This is the message. That's why Ramayana is relevant. That till today, imperialism, what happened to imperialism? There was a time when it was said that the sun of British Empire never sets. Today it has set so much that there is a, with Brexit and new things that, one is wondering what to do to restore the sun, not the S-U-N sun, but the S-O-N sun. Look at the irony of the whole thing. So Ramayana gives us that message that even if you have all the splendors like the king of Lanka, even if you are a developed civilization like Atlantis, no less, materially developed, but if you are spiritually not developed, material development and even your, capacities and talents will one day lead to ruin if you are not living a life of dharma. Then another lesson of Ramayana is, however crude an animal we may be, even in Rakshasa or Asura, this is the mystic symbol. If we surrender to the divine, as Vibhishna could do, as Hanuman could do, as Sugriv could do, there is hope for us. Even if we are a Vanara, Chanchal, restless, curious, that's how Hanuman describes himself. We call him today Ram Bhakt Hanuman. But Hanuman says, I'm a restless monkey, what to do? I can't sit for meditation, my mind is never at still. That's why he goes to a garden and starts plucking fruits. I am a monkey. That's my nature. But this monkey put at the service of the divine, the mystic symbol of Ramayana, can be transformed into a demigod. Hanuman is one of the immortals. Another immortal is Vibhishna. Can you see the beauty of the story? Vibhishna is an Asura. He is born of the Asurkul. So it doesn't matter. Again, another beautiful thing of the story. It doesn't matter what your birth is. What matters is what your actions are. Vibhishna's deeds, Vibhishna's surrender to the divine, changes him from an Asura to a Deva type. He is one of the immortals, meaning thereby he is one of the gods. That's what the immortals mean, not just that physically he is still present. And many other such mystic symbols wherein the story brings out the story of Kevat, again a very deep mystic symbol. Many, many mystic symbols in the Ramayana. We can look at Ramayana purely as a mystic story. And if you don't get into this, nitpicking details, which is okay, but if you look at the story as a large whole, you see, when we look at a sea, it gives us delight. But is everything happening inside the sea beautiful? No. There are sharks which are absorbing poor little fishes. But yet the sea gives a delight when you look at it from the totality. There are tsunamis when lakhs of people die. So when you look at a story and a narrative, it is good to look at it from a totality. Even a human being. Supposing, we all will be judged one day. But if we look at small little incidents here and there, so Ramayana teaches us to look at a human being in totality, to look at everything in totality. And then, most importantly, Rama represents the ethical mind. It says that, well, ethical mind can help, but it cannot solve all the problems of society. Rama could not. This is a fact that Rama could not solve all the problems of his own times, including in his own personal life. And this failure paves the way for the coming of Krishna and Buddha and Sri Aurobindo. So there are loopholes, like a master ikebana artist, when he does a very perfect art, he leaves the scissor by the side that somebody would come and make it still more perfect. That's why we have the lineage of avatars. The avatar doesn't come and just put back the same cycle, same place. He takes it one step forward. Rama's business was to take an animal humanity to a more humanized humanity. He did that admirably well. His business was to eliminate the Asura and the Rakshasa. He did that admirably well. His business was not to show that, how to love your wife forever and ever. Well, it was not his business, and he did a bad job, if you want to put it like that. But still not so bad a job, given that he goes all the way to Lanka with utmost chivalry, daredevil act, face death, and yet take the challenge of the Asura. Something which even modern mind, it's okay that we love our wives and children and husbands. But how many of us will stand up and do this, what he has done? It is something amazing. As to this, idea about personal and larger issue of Raj Dharma and personal Dharma, it is relevant even till today. I'll tell you a story which was made into a film based on a true story. If somebody knows the name, please tell me. I started with R. There is a lady who marries a Pakistani officer. Do you remember the story? Anybody remembers the name of the film? Yeah, anybody knows? Have you seen that film? It was a film which was released 2 years back. And it's based on a true story where a woman marries a Pakistani officer just for passing on the intelligence to India. Because she's a patriot to the core. She marries and eventually she becomes the cause of a husband's death. Is it right or is it wrong? Take this question. She did something which definitely is wrong as far as her personal life is concerned. You can say she cheated her husband. But she didn't cheat her husband for the sake of another man. She deceived her husband for the sake of a Razi. Razi is the film. Now when you read this story, so there are times when you have dilemmas like that. She cheated upon her husband, deceived him. But cheated upon for what? Not for another man, not for personal pleasure. She put her own life at stake. And because she felt the greater good of her own country, that was important, because that was the time when Pakistan was trying from every side to corner India. She enters, deep penetrates, and gathers the intelligence. By the way, there was another film which was made, Ghazi. She is the one who had passed the information that there is going to be a submarine attack and averted it. So can you imagine that she averted a large-scale disaster which could have taken place? That due to the deceit of that time Pakistan army and who wanted to attack. Why? Because she put her own personal life at stake, and yes, definitely she deceived her husband. So in life there are such dilemmas, not between right and wrong, but between rival rights. That's where Gita also starts. So there is a lesser right, there is a greater right. There is a lesser unit, there is a greater unit. And one has to make a choice. So the lesson of Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Gita, of life itself is that choose the greater good, choose the larger good, choose that which is more deeply, intimately connected with the dharma than the immediate thing of the moment. That's what Rama chose, that's what Krishna chose, that's what I am sure deep within we all will choose. If there is a choice for a soldier between his own life and his family comfort, he chooses, the life of the nation. He chooses the life of the nation. It's a bad thing. He should have run away. Why? Because his family will suffer. But he chooses it. So there are in life choices like that, not always between right and wrong. As we look at it, it's an oversimplified version of life, but between rival rights. And how do we make a choice? We choose based on the dharma. What will lead to a larger unfolding of the divinity in man? Of course, now we have a new thing which Mother brings it. How to know this dharma is not by any artificial standard, but by the voice of the soul within. The union with the divine will. That's how she brings it. But till you do that, well, this was the standard which Rama followed. People would judge him right or wrong. Yet look at the beauty of the epic. Look at now, just enjoy this aspect. People have debated about Ramayana, and they would continue to debate. But have you seen that people have debated, they have come, lived, and gone? But Rama endures. Isn't it a marvel? It's not just a belief system. Nobody ever converts anybody to the belief of Rama cult. Supanka has a cult in her name. Nobody. There is nobody who is converting people by force. Believe in Rama, otherwise you will be killed. And yet Rama has endured. Because there is something about Rama when you read the Ramayana. This is my suggestion. Please read the Ramayana. Read Ramcharitmanas. If Valmiki is more difficult. And at the end of the whole narrative, you will see Rama as somebody who is really worth emulating. Yes, not in all aspects, but in the essence. He brings out the divine afflatus of in man. The manhood of man. Manhood of man is not about man who is a woman. Well, equally for a woman. Sita, she is deeply inspiring and moving character. She brings out the best within a woman. So both are fighters, both are warriors. At different grounds they fight, personal and collective battle. And they don't always win, but still they leave their beautiful stamp on the Indian psyche, and that is why they have endured and will continue to endure for times to come. Any other question, Uday?
I'll open it out. Everybody who's around, feel free to unmute yourself and step in, ask your question. Anything which you feel may have been left out. I think that's really comprehensive. Yes, go ahead.
There is this Ahilya story, na Gautam Rishi cursing his wife Ahilya. What symbolism?
Okay, very good. I'm glad. Ahilya's story, is that true? You want to know about Ahilya's story? Okay, thank you for asking that. And how could we miss it out? So Ahilya's story is a very fascinating story. Ahilya's story runs like this, that she is married to Rishi Gautama and both are engaged in a tapasya. And a point of time comes when Indra falls for Ahilya. The whole narrative I'll tell you. And Indra falls for Ahilya and comes to his devious and crooked ways. So he makes a plan. And the plan is this, that when Gautam Rishi, they will make sure that he goes early morning for bath to outside. There were no taps and municipality water. He'll go to the river. And between the time when he comes back, Indra will go dressed up as, he's a fantastic makeup artist, and he'll change his face into Gautam Rishi and go and entice Ahilya, seduce her, sleep with her and come back. And he will be satisfied. That's how the story is put. And when Gautam Rishi comes, he comes to know this has happened, and she also realizes it's a mistake. And though it's a genuine mistake, yet King Gautam, in a fit of anger, curses her that you become a stone. And she becomes a stone. And this stone, Ahilya, is redeemed by the touch of Rama. So this story, of course, as far as Rama is concerned, this is about his divinity, that he comes and redeems. But now look at the story. The whole story. As I said, there are many stories which are deeply mystic. Very few people know what happened to Rishi Gautam, by the way. Gautam eventually goes on to write what is called as a Nyaya Shastra. You see, his personal life, he has done a grave injustice. Gautam is not to be justified through these means. But Gautam, because he has done a grave justice, what is the atonement for such a man? Reflect upon what true justice is. And today we have, these 6 branches of Indian philosophy. One of them is Nyaya. Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa. Now, Yoga. Now, Gautam is the one who reflects upon what justice is, what it ought to be. And he comes up with this scripture on Nyaya. We may or may not follow it. That's not so important. But the story of Ahilya is this, that they are 2 beings who are engaged in a deep spiritual pursuit. They are beings, not just common married couple. And they are the ones who are ascending to higher and higher levels of consciousness. Now, when you go to higher and higher levels of consciousness, you are tested. And these tests become more and more subtle as you ascend. So as they are ascending, the test becomes so subtle because this is something well known to mystics. The Mother and Shobindo speaks about it. You have to become more and more vigilant. It's like this: when you are driving a scooter on the road, be careful. When you are driving a aircraft, you should be doubly, triply careful. So as we grow in yoga, one has to become far more careful and vigilant. So there is a point of time when Indra decides to test. It's his job, bad job. Not a good job description, but anyways, that's his job. So he comes and tests Ahilya, that let me see, is he really ready? Now, how does he test? By assuming the form of Gautam Rishi is the subtlest of tests. So what is the test there? The test is very simple, 2-fold test. Both of them were engaged in a kind of tapasya which needed complete brahmacharya. And even if her husband came and wanted to be with her, it was Ahilya's business to tell him, look here, not now. We are engaged in it's not the time, he goes to come back to do his prayers. It's not the auspicious time also when you should be just sleeping with me. And the third element is that it is not by the form but by the consciousness we recognize. And these are the 3 places where Ahilya made a subtle mistake. Not a mistake where she should be punished, certainly not. But this is the mistake she made when she was moving in that direction. And Gautam made a worse mistake. He also was overtaken by anger and in a fit of passion. He curses. So both fall. It's not just Ahilya falls. Both fall. For Ahilya, she becomes like a stone. Like a stone means not a physical stone. It is called a jadavat. In modern language, we would say she developed depression, stupor. She went into a stupor state where she would not eat, where she would not drink. She would stay in that state because naturally, any woman, it's very hurtful. And this man also suffered a fall, but he, instead of going into a shell, he goes through a lot of personal pain and agony. Because, whatever he may try, now this curse is so tremendous. Curse means that word which has been released from his mouth, that Ahilya won't come out. He doesn't have the power to bring back Ahilya. So he suffers in one way and Ahilya suffers in another way. Of course, both have their own issues involved, as I said. But the story ends with a very beautiful way. And that is how the touch of the divine can redeem. And it redeems, again, Ahilya's stone. Even if we are in the most ridiculous, absurd states, Ahilya's state is ridiculous for no fault of hers. It can hardly be regarded as a fault, this kind of thing. Yet, the grace is there and it can redeem you in such a way. When Ahilya is changed from the stone-like state, Jadvat Avastha, she doesn't become yet again back to her womanhood. She becomes a goddess and ascends to heaven. So the story is clearly symbolic. Even if we have fallen, doesn't matter. Even if we are, for whatever reason, not because of our own fault, because of our husband's fault or wife's fault or whoever's fault, there is always somebody or the other. Something in us opened the doors to it, doesn't matter. Even in that most absurd state, the touch of the divine grace can redeem us and redeem us in such a way that we skip stages and immediately arrive where we have to be, we should be. Now the beauty of this story is Ahilya is in a Jadvat state, but though outwardly she is like a stone, she is constantly waiting for Lord Rama. That is the tapas she is engaged in. Because she has been told this, that one day Rama will come and his touch will redeem you. So when we live life like that, the same truth is given in the Gita in a different way. That even if you are in the worst of states, so in Sanatan Dharma there is nothing like eternal damnation or an eternal hell. You may be in the darkest and most fallen state. Still, if you call God's name, very soon you are released from it and you become one with the gods. This is how the Gita puts it. And in the Rama's narrative, it's put as a story, wherein Even if we are in the worst of states, the touch of the divine releases us from a stone like state into a god-like state, from a state where we are completely subject to inert material nature to a state of freedom and largeness and joy. Now, this is how we have to see. So, as I was saying, we can look at the story from a very surface point of view. Surface point of view, what is this Ahilya? Because she's a woman, she has to suffer. By the way, Gautam also suffered. Of course, he has to take the much greater burden of the evil. And that's why he suffers much more, because he's conscious of the sin he has done. So, this is one part. But when you look at the story from the deeper aspect, you discover the sense, the mystic sense within it. So, in Ramayana, several places, nobody has asked me the story of Sambhuk. Similar thing. So, all these stories are about a deeper mystic truth which have been told to us in the form of a narrative. It's not that the story is false. Some things happen. But to believe that a stone again changed into a woman, not even a woman, a godlike being and ascended to heaven, obviously it's a mystic occult story. It's not about physical event happening that somebody will touch a stone and it'll change into a being. So in these stories, there is a mystic sense which we have lost. That's the problem when we read this story, because now our gaze is only outward. We are like Dumat Sena in Savitri. Our mind has, we have fallen blind. So we cannot see the deeper mystic truths. All of us, but when we recover these mystic truths through yoga, then we discover that, this story is like mine. I have experienced the state. I mean, all of us, at least I can say for myself, states when we are like Ahilya for no fault of ours. We feel fallen, we feel downcast, we feel absolutely, lifeless. And yet, again, I can speak for myself and countless others. Just calling the mother, we have not only come out of that state, we feel once again a godlike joy. So then you understand the story. Oh, this is so beautiful, a mystic story. We have all experienced in our ascension test and we fall. And we realize the test was very subtle. It was not very gross, very subtle. And yet, we are redeemed by the grace. So we can look at the whole story, narrative of Ahilya and all others. Ultimately, Ramayana is a spiritual scripture. It's not just a religious scripture. We should not forget it. So it's not just history in the sense of history as a physical documentation of facts. It is history in the sense that it is something which brings out the deep archetypes of human nature which are perennially relevant and connects them with a spiritual thread of evolution which is running behind life. That's how it is history. In India, itihas means that. It's not just a physical narrative. Just to close with an example, that if somebody were to write about Mahabharata purely from an outer perspective, what would be Krishna? There would be an entry in the Wikipedia of war. Krishna was a cowherdsman who was, driving the chariot of Arjuna. He belonged to a low caste. But, they will add, that narrative will be added. But he wanted to be on a powerful side and somehow make the Pandavas win. Now, all that is not, this is how the narrative will run. So that he can be on the correct side. But that is not the truth of Krishna. Krishna was such a warrior that alone he could decimate the entire Kaurava army. But that apart, when we look at the same Mahabharata story from the mystic point of view, when the whole war is over and each of the yodhas are debating who is greater of amongst us, then they go to Barbaric. He is supposed to be that character without, again a mystic symbol as a person with a head and not a body who can see the whole war. So they ask him, who was the greatest warrior of us all? And he laughs. And they ask him, why do you laugh? Tell us. He says, because I saw only one warrior on both sides. Who is he? He says, I saw Krishna this side and Krishna on the other side. So the same story seen from the material angle is one and seen from the mystic angle is another. So in India, there was a time when the mystic vision, when the occult vision from the spiritual understanding was very, very prominent. And the Ramayana and Mahabharata still carry relevance to all who have this part awakened. But it is true that in today's time, which is the product of an extreme left side rational analytical age, which was needed at one point of time, we have lost that vision. And we need to capture it, not abandon reason, but to purify it and uplift it to a divine reason. Then we see the symbol, then we see the mystic truth, the occult happenings, and the spiritual thread. So
I wanted to ask, what was Rama's age when he was asked to go to exile?
Okay. See, that is a very. It is said that the age of mankind from Satyug, Satyug till now has dwindled. So I'll tell you just to give an example of comparison. When Dashratha begot Rama, he's supposed to be 1,000 years of age. Now, I believe that it's a narrative which means that many, many very great old man. He couldn't have, so the yagna and all that takes place. So Rama also was fairly, in his, maybe in his 30s or 40s, that's how what I have read the narrative, but I may not be accurate in that terms. And that was nothing at that point of time. I mean, 100 years age would be a youthful man. So that's what I said, 14 years was actually, if you look at from our perspective, 80 to 14, when you look at an age when people were supposed to live for hundreds of years, 14 years was nothing but, a fraction of a moment. But
For that matter, even during the Mahabharata, was it not the case that you would attain the prime of your youth when you were in the
yeah, Mahabharata war, Arjuna was 70 years of age.
Arjuna was
And-
70 at the time. Yeah.
Bhishma was 170 and Krishna himself was about 108 or around 100. So that was a time when age factor as of today was very different. Arjuna was 70 in the prime of his youth. You can imagine? So, I mean, I don't remember the exact age of Rama, but it was certainly not like, a 25-year-old person being coronated the king of a, country. Rama didn't mind it. It was also like, okay, I'll get an experience of facing the daredevil asuras. So we can look at it like that. It was not such a big deal, 14 years, during those days as it would be today. Okay.
Any other questions, or should we stop for today?
I have one more question.
Yes, please.
Anta.
Why would the god give boons to the Rakshasas even if they knew that they were going to misuse it?
Oh, boons given to Rakshasa, not just boons. Please add the adjective impossible boons. So, especially by Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. And Vishnu has to come to balance. Well, you see, creation works like that. Creation works like that if you have to evolve. After all, who are the Rakshasa and the Asuras? They are the one who oppose the evolutionary plan. So they are strengthened by the divine, ultimately through these gods, to oppose the evolutionary plan. What kind of a planning is this? Now, this planning, if you go into the deeper aspect, it's very evident that by opposition, you grow in strength to achieve and deserve what you are really wanting. So, in more psychological sense, it is called as the shadow. So, Asura and Rakshasas are the shadow. And the shadow is so strong that it doesn't let you realize what you are born to realize. Now, we would all want I wish there was no opposition. But imagine if there is no opposition, where will our strength and wisdom come out? Imagine the story of Ramayana, just to put it in context. Imagine the story of Ramayana without Ravana, without Meghnad, anybody. All are good guys, and Rama came upon earth and he married Sita, and everything was wonderful hereafter. Something is missing in the story. It is Rama's manhood. So Asuras are oppose the plan, but by opposing they end up helping the plan of God. So in the larger picture, in the grandest narrative, this opposition helps us to grow in strength and wisdom. It's like, when you, as somebody has beautifully said, wisdom is the light that comes after passing through the storm. So Asuras represent the stormy and turbulent side of human nature, and they are not just outside. In today's times, we should look at them inside. So we ourselves will find what is strength this shadow has of holding us back. Who has given it the strength? If you look at it, they have not done tapasya and got the boon, but strength is there. It doesn't allow us easily to escape into the greater truth. But it is still given, and it is given because by facing that opposition, we go stronger and wiser. So Asuras are given, strengthened by Brahma and Shiva, also because they know eventually no Asura, no Rakshasa can cancel the original will. They know it. So it is done with full knowledge that you oppose, doesn't matter. By opposing, you will end up actually facilitating and hastening my work. And there are many, many examples of this even in modern times, which, paucity of time, I'm not entering into it. Okay, Uday? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mercy.